Welcome back to another episode of Life in the Stands podcast. We have Jake and Zach on the podcast tonight. We're excited to jump into some NFL topics. I'm going to let Bender kind of explain it, the segment we're going to do in a little bit here. It's a little bit different than what we've done before. But before we jump into that, I want to thank everyone for watching and listening. Remember to like and subscribe on whatever platform you are watching and listening on. And with that, Bender, let's talk about this new segment, What If?
Yeah, so I'm really excited for this, and Zach is as well. So this new segment's called What If, and it's just a bunch of theoretical BS, and it's NFL topics. So, um, for example, if we say, what if Russell Wilson's the QB1 and the Steelers make the playoffs, which is our first one, what do you think happens?
Yeah, so I'll jump into this answer, and we have a bunch of these, so I am really excited to jump into this. The Russell Wilson conversation, I think if that is true, the Steelers have a top 15 QB in the league. And I don't think it's because Russell Wilson is like going out like gangbusters and making every single play. I think it's because he's not making the big mistake. And people seem to forget that when he first started his career in Seattle, he was much more of a game manager. He wasn't always this like, rust ball, let me throw it deep, moon ball kind of thing all times. Like he wasn't always like that. So I do have confidence that Russell Wilson can kind of, go back to that game manager kind of style, especially realizing the roster he's playing around. And I also think it's not as unlikely as people think that he ends up playing the whole season. If the Steelers are above 500 the entire time, I don't see them putting in Justin Fields, barring injury or like special packages.
Yeah, and the biggest thing in my mind, and we talked about this before, if the Steelers make the playoffs fully healthy or at least healthy enough, like TJ's playing, Russell Wilson's your starting QB and you make the playoffs, A, that means Russell Wilson is playing good. B, that means the Steelers might be real threats for the actual Super Bowl. And nobody's talking about it because that defense has been stout for a long time. And the QB spot was the only spot they really needed to fill over that amount of time.
Yeah.
So I think that's big expectations for the Steelers if they make the playoffs.
Yeah. In the past couple of playoff runs, TJ Watt hasn't even been healthy, or Cam Hayward for that matter. So, or Minka Fitzpatrick, like all the big names in the defense. So, yeah, health is going to be a big thing.
Health's a big thing anywhere, but right now contracts are a big thing anywhere. So, what if CeeDee Lamb and the Cowboys cannot get a deal done in Dallas?
This would be really surprising to me, first of all. And I don't see them trading CD either way. So, even if the deal doesn't get done this year, I think it's more likely that he holds out and skips a year and sits out than it is that they would trade him. I think that's where they're at with him. That being said, I don't think that teams aren't calling. I think teams are probably making those calls right now, but I just don't see anything other than like a holdout or like an extended contract negotiation, but I don't see him going anywhere else.
Makes me wonder if the Steelers would be one of those teams calling the Cowboys because it's the same kind of contract situation as Ayuk. So I feel like we got to keep our eye on that. But I feel like if CD doesn't get his contract signed, I think Dallas is looking towards a rebuild because without him, the offense is garbage. But
Yeah.
we're going to move on to the next what if here. And it's a pretty common question that's going around. What if Caleb Williams is a star immediately in this league?
Yeah, I think pretty simply, Caleb Williams makes the Bears a playoff team. I mean, hell, even if he's not a star, they're probably still a playoff team this year with all the weapons they brought in. So, I mean, this is one of the best situations a first round pick, a number one QB has ever walked into. Like, it's crazy the team he's walking into. So, he really just needs to be confident, and he showed more than that in his preseason debut. I'm really actually getting concerned about the Bears because in that preseason game he looked really good. He looked really good, really solid. I don't think he needs to be anything crazy this year for them.
Yeah, he definitely showed some flashes. The only thing that concerns me in its first year is that that division is pretty solid compared to what it's been over the past years. I think the Lions are a playoff team for sure, and the Packers are a playoff team. So I feel like if for some reason the Bears make it in, one of those other two teams do not. So I
And
think
the
that's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, and the Vikings, they even probably had playoff aspirations before JJ McCarthy injury, Jordan Addison injury. It seems like the Vikings are just having a rough go of it right now, but if they would keep themselves together, like that's another really quality team in that division. So I'll give you that, but I think, with all the talent the Bears brought in, it's just hard to see them not being a playoff team.
For sure. And I think they can compete with other teams that are like fringe wildcard teams like the Rams, Seahawks, and all
Yep,
the other teams in other divisions. But I
definitely.
guess we'll see if Caleb Williams is the real deal. But
Yep.
we'll move on to a guy that we didn't get a chance to see last year. What if Aaron Rodgers is healthy this year for a full season?
Yeah, I'm going to start this one by talking about their division too, because I feel like it needs it. I mean, if you look at the Patriots can't even get top tier talent to join their team when they're offering them $32 million annual contracts. The Bills, I think, got worse this year, and Milano went down again. Like it feels like they're going to have some injury struggles. So the Dolphins feel like the best competition the Jets have in their division. Like that's what it feels like to me. And even that being said, we all know that the Dolphins aren't that much competition when January rolls around. So my final kind of prediction with the Jets is that if Aaron Rodgers stays healthy all season, I think they win 12 plus games. And I think they're a top 2 or 3 seed in the AFC.
I tend to agree. And your point on the Dolphins, they are probably the streakiest but most talented team in that division. But them just being streaky will allow a consistent Aaron Rodgers and the Jets crazy defense to jump ahead of them. And you don't know what the Jets are going to get in return for Hassan Reddick if they decide to trade him. I believe they're going to get an extension done. I think Reddick's playing games to get an extension done. So I think that team is going to look crazy next year,
Yeah.
or this season. I know you don't want to talk about this guy either, but I'm going to make you. Next question here is what if Lamar and the Ravens are an early playoff exit or do not make the playoffs at all?
Yeah, I mean, this would be a really surprising thing to me again. I mean, I guess it's not entirely out of the question based off that division. If you look at the AFC North, because again, you have 4 teams that probably should all make the playoffs this year if you're looking at the expectations around them. So, I'm going to give them the respect here though too, because it's hard to say they should move on if that happens, right? Like it's like, do you say they move on from Lamar Jackson? Like, how do you say that a year after he won MVP again? So, I mean, I don't know. Like, I think again, it's hard to say that if they have that bad of a season, they should just move on. I think the real question there is like, how did it happen? Like, if they miss the playoffs or they're an early exit, like, how did that happen? Is it injuries? Is it new offensive coordinator didn't vibe again? Is it whatever? So I think that kind of like would tell you also like what their next steps might be or have to be.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because I think they could get booted from making the playoffs at all because that's for sure the strongest division in the NFL, in my opinion. Um, I don't think it would happen the following offseason, like a year from now. But I think if they would be an early bounce or a non-playoff team, I know he's been there a while. I know he's a solidified guy in the league, but you might have to think about moving on from Harbaugh. It's
I
just
do, yeah.
been too long without them winning. I know you want to respect him because like he won with Flacco, but you can't have a two-time MVP winner not do anything in the playoffs. His playoff success is not the greatest.
Yep.
But we'll move to a team that I don't like either here. The Eagles, what if the Eagles continue their offense struggles and miss the playoffs? Because I think this is an interesting one because I think the
Oh,
coaches are on the hot seat.
yeah. Coaches are on the hot seat there, and I think you also look at the GM because Howie Roseman is widely regarded as one of the best GMs in the league. But I think this question is really similar to that last one. Honestly, I look at how did it happen? Was it injuries? Was it lack of vibing in the offensive coordinator to QB kind of situation? Like what was really going on to make that not tick? For me, I feel like it's easier to look at a guy like Jalen Hurts and want to see more or say that we have to move on than it is to do that from Lamar Jackson. I think Lamar Jackson's been doing it for a couple more years and a little more consistently. Whereas Jalen Hurts, I see like really big time production, a little more streakiness. And then like when he falls off, like he falls off. So that conversation to me is a little bit easier than the Lamar Jackson one.
I think
But
that's an
either way, coaches in the hot seat probably.
I think that's an interesting conversation that you just brought up with Jalen Hurts by himself. I think Jalen Hurts is at this point better than Lamar Jackson just because the Eagles actually made a Super Bowl with him. Like I think his resume looks better when you make a Super Bowl rather than be bounced pretty quick.
Yeah.
Um, it's the same reason we look at Josh Allen and Dak Prescott. So I think a Jalen Hurts versus Lamar Jackson conversation might be in our future.
Yeah,
Um,
and before we go on to the next thing, the only reason I mean that's an interesting take on that, but he made this Super Bowl his 1 year with Brian Johnson as offensive coordinator, and if you look at his production outside of that 1 year, it's not that great. Like
I
at
agree.
any point.
But that's why coaches are going to be on the hot seat because you need to find somebody to unlock the guy that got you to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, because it's there. It's there for sure. That's it.
For
It is an
sure.
interesting conversation. We'll have to continue that.
For sure, for sure. Next one. I don't want to talk about this team just because Trevor Lawrence got paid way too much money. Um, what if the Jaguars missed the playoffs?
You you regret the contract you paid Trevor Lawrence, and that's it.
Yeah, I feel like there's not a lot to it. I feel like they were forced to make that decision because the Texans and the Colts are looking pretty solid at this moment in time, and they had nowhere else to go. Um, it's also a very immovable contract if they decide to
Yeah.
move on. So I don't really know what their plan is. They got rid of Calvin Ridley.
Right. Like you lost
Um,
weapons, and you're telling me all that money you spent on Trevor Lawrence couldn't be better spent on the Justin Simmons, the Matthew Judons of the world. Like you're telling me you couldn't
yeah.
make a move like that and decide to just go pay Trevor Lawrence. Like I don't know. I think they're gonna regret it.
On that note, I'm a Cowboys fan, but go Falcons. The Falcons look crazy right now too.
Justin
Anyway,
Simmons, Matthew Judon, both in the Falcons.
wild for weird prices.
Yeah.
But
Steelers pay them week 1 in Atlanta for an R.D. Smith redemption game.
that's going to be fun to
It'll
watch
be a fun game to watch week 1. Yeah.
for sure. Let's stay in the same division. What if Anthony Richardson is healthy for the full season?
I like Anthony Richardson a lot. I think that even when he was playing last season, it was very young QB kinds of things, right? Like I think that he needs to learn from a lot of in-game action. So this is a little bit of a hot take, but I think if Joe Flacco played the whole season with the Colts versus Anthony Richardson, they might win more games with Joe Flacco. That being said, you need to play Anthony Richardson the whole year because he needs the game action to learn from. So I think that's where I'd stand on it because Joe Flacco on that Colts roster, being a game manager, doing what he knows what to do, they'll win 10 or 11 games. I don't know with Anthony Richardson. The floor and the ceiling are vast. Like they could win 7 games with him, or they could win 12.
Okay, similar comparison. Gardner Minshew played really well last year when Anthony Richardson went out. I think him and Flacco are pretty comparable at this point. Minshew maybe a little bit better at this point in their careers, but Anthony Richardson was starting to put up numbers and put up W columns for the Colts before he went out. Like he to me looked like he was on the road to competing with CJ Stroud for offensive rookie of the year as well as MVP because CJ Stroud was on MVP track. I think if he would have been able to stay healthy enough, I think you would have been talking about him in a different light. And now that he got injured, it's kind of shut down in your brain like you don't like him right now. I think that's kind of where you're at.
Yeah, I mean, his injury obviously, like it is what it is. He's a mobile quarterback, so it's going to happen. You look at the RG3s of the world, right? Like it's bound to happen. But I don't know. Like if you go back and watch the film, he turned the ball over a lot. He wasn't very quick with his decision making. Didn't do a great job of reading coverages. Didn't throw to the middle of the field a lot. So it's like there are some things that when you're playing your first 4 games and you're Anthony Richardson and you step on the field as immediately the best athlete on the field, like you can hide some of those things, but eventually like teams will lock onto that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if he comes out like gangbusters again, has a phenomenal start to the year, but then starts to fall off a little bit as he goes through some of those kind of like learning curve slumps.
They'll have time to figure him out. Other teams will have enough film to figure him out a little bit. So I agree with the ups and downs. I just think last year deserved a little bit more respect, other than the fact that he didn't know how to slide, which got himself hurt.
Yeah.
But last topic here, and I want to be done talking about this guy after this segment, at least until the season starts, because he's just been in the media way too much.
I already know what
So,
you're going to say.
what if Brandon Ayuk continues to hold out or gets traded?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone at this point just wants this to be done, right? Like, I'm tired of seeing Ayuk's name in the media without like a solution. 100%. I think everyone feels that way. I think no matter where he gets traded to, he doesn't have as good of a year as if he stayed with the Niners.
I agree.
And I
And
think
we
that's
talked
kind of
about
the
this
bottom
last
line.
episode with Beans on too. Like I don't see the production happening anywhere else unless he's on a stacked team again. And I
Yeah.
expected you to just answer that segment with 2 words. I thought you were just gonna say go Steelers and be done.
Yeah.
But
No, I mean, like I've even given that more thought now though too, because like Van Jefferson has had a fantastic camp for the Steelers. He's a guy that has the frame of a number two or number three NFL wide receiver. He has familiarity with Arthur Smith. He's had years where he puts up 700 or 800 yards. I don't think the Steelers offense needs guys in those 2 and 3 receiver positions that do much more than that, to be honest. So, I look around and I'm like, gosh, bringing in Brandon Ayuk sets a different level of expectation for the offense. Then I almost like the idea of all those guys being underdogs and coming in and kind of being scrappy and all fighting for those spots throughout the season. So I don't know. Like obviously, we're not going to say no to Brandon Ayuk as a Steelers fan, but the tone on it has changed the longer this has been drawn out, I think.
yeah, for sure, I agree. Last quick comment. Things to keep in mind in the way you run your offense. You like to run the ball a lot. Najee in a contract year. Warren got a year under his belt, so I think that's going to look really good for you guys this year.
Yeah, and Darnell Washington in camp. We'll kind of wrap it up here, but they were having him like learn pass sets as a tackle, and they do this like back on backers drill in Steelers camp where they literally just make the offensive player stand still and they give a full head of steam to like a linebacker or a blitzer, and it's supposed to be hard for the offense. Like the offense is supposed to be at a disadvantage. And apparently Darnell Washington stonewalled Alex Highsmith 3 times in a row from a tackle pass set. And you're talking about a guy who's like Alex Highsmith is probably a top 15 edge rusher. Like he was like top 10 in sacks last year.
Yeah.
And like that's your tight end doing that. So I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I think the receiver issue is not it's overplayed, right? Because they're going to play a style of football it's not going to be needed as much. But that's another episode of Life in the Stands podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed this new segment of What Ifs. Let us know in the comments and kill the like button if you liked it. That way we'll know to do more of these kinds of things. Remember to like and subscribe on whatever platform you're watching and listening on, and we'll see you on the next episode.